Such crimes you cannot imagine. It was winter, and the ground was cold and hard, but whilst that might have posed an issue for us archaeologists, for a construction crew with plant machinery it was no problem at all. I suppose I should be amazed that they found anything intact. But they did. And what a find it was. 42 bodies, only the first of which bearing anything in the way of recent damage. They all lay neatly in their mass graves side by side, nothing but skeletons now. They bore the fragility and the loss of age with their arms pulled behind their backs, some still bearing the hint of rope that had bound their wrists. Criminals then, we supposed, or unfortunate prisoners. The council were not happy at the discovery. This was now an archaeological site, and they knew what delays to the project that would cause. My team moved in as soon as possible, making vague assurances as to how quickly we would try to get this all sorted, but, quite frankly, we all knew that this would take as long as it jolly well took. Due to the history of the area, we thought they were likely to be of Anglo-Saxon origin, and whilst waiting for the results of carbon dating, the team got to searching the site for anything that might offer evidence of such. But there was a distracting element. Whilst 41 of the bodies looked how we would expect for their age and location. Fragile, broken, old. One of them did not. The remains found on the far west of the site, seemingly deliberately spaced a little further from the others, was in a very different condition. Rather than being a skeleton, he, for it was indeed a male, was mostly mummified. His taut skin a steely gray, with eyeless sockets and twisted mouth. His clothing was still intact and the rope around his arms largely still present. Added to the gravesite at a later date, perhaps? But even if he was a later addition, why had he mummified when the others had decayed naturally? The conditions in the ground were the same across the whole site, and dry and airless it was not. After a few days of investigation, we had not yet turned up any artifacts that would help us date the site. These people, it seemed, had been buried with nothing beyond their clothes, except the mummy. Whilst undertaking a careful examination of his body, team member Lindsay suddenly called me over. "Helen, look at this," she said, pointing to his chest. To my surprise, I saw that a small piece of animal parchment had been sewn to his skin. There was a phrase heavily inked on the parchment. "How on earth has any of this survived?" I wondered out loud, and then peered closer at the writing. "That looks like Old English." Lindsay nodded her agreement. So it's a Saxon site?" "I guess so," I said. "Or he is, at any rate." I looked around at the other remains. But why is he the only one who doesn't look that old? "There must be something about the ground right here," she speculated, though not sounding too sure. I didn't blame her. It was the same silty clay at this part of the site as everywhere else. "Maybe they put something on his body before he was buried." This suggestion came from Peter standing nearby. I nodded in a non-committal way. "Perhaps. Can you get the phrase translated?" Peter took out his phone to snap a picture and then wandered off. An hour or two after lunch, he reappeared. "Well, I have the translation." "That was quick," I said, surprised. "Oh, this isn't the proper one," he chuckled. "I sent that off to the university. This is just the best I could do with the internet translation." A Saxon translator. Huh. You really can find anything online these days. He nodded. "Yeah, so basically, and this is a rough translation, you understand, but it says something like, such crimes you cannot imagine." He paused, or words to that effect. So they definitely were criminals then, I said, nodding thoughtfully. Seems so, agreed Peter. And I guess he was the worst of the bunch. I looked over at where the mummy was lying. He definitely appeared to have been treated differently to the rest of those present. I wondered what he had done to warrant such special treatment. In the end, we decided to get an exhumation license for the mummy to see if we could determine what had caused him to be in such a different condition to the others. The council would clearly have liked us to do the same for all the remains, but as the others were decent, well-behaved skeletons who had decayed in the proper way, they would get to stay in their graves. A closer examination of the mummy with considerably better equipment led to two discoveries. The first was that there had been, at some point, a second piece of parchment sewn to his stomach. It was now long gone, and we might never have known what it said had Lindsay not discovered an imprint of the ink from it on the inside of the body's clothes. It was, of course, written in reverse and in terrible condition, but I still sent her off with Peter to see if they could get any translation off of it. The second discovery was that mummy's lungs were filled with dirt, which likely meant one thing. He had been buried alive. It's nightmare fuel right there. However, what we did not find was any evidence as to why he had mummified. Chemical tests of the surrounding soil and of his skin showed nothing that explains it. I found myself wondering if we would ever know. I got a call at 4 a.m. a few days later and rushed down to the university where the mummy had been temporarily stored. Very temporarily, as it turned out, because he was missing. It's been stolen? I repeated, after I'd first been given the news by Peter. It must have been, he said. The staff assured me it wasn't moved, so it could not have been misplaced. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes for a few moments. Have the police been informed? Peter nodded. I looked over at the table where, until this morning, our archaeological mystery had been lying. Now there was nothing there but a piece of old rope. I walked over to it. Why would they cut his arms free before stealing him? It's not like it would make him easier to take. Peter didn't have an answer for me. At least, not on that. Oh, by the way, we managed to get some words off the clothing. I don't suppose it makes much difference now, but I had another go at translating them, if you want to hear. I shrugged, defeated. Sure. It says something like, do not open. Do not open? I snorted. Seems a bit pointless to put a warning against grave robbing on the body itself. A bit late, really. Or not, considering we had just been robbed. At that moment, Lindsay came in. She glanced at the table with a frown. Then, catching my eye, she held up a piece of paper. I've got the translation from the second phrase if you want it. I already gave her that, said Peter dejectedly. Yes, well, she said a little haughtily. As accurate as Saxon Translate Online might be, I think I'll still go with the one given to me by the actual professor of ancient languages. I waved a hand at her. Yes, go on. He said it was a little hard to read, and there are words missing, but he believes it says something along the lines of, dare you not release. Well, I can't say that makes anything much clearer, I responded. Release what? I sighed, and I dropped my head back to stare bleakly at the ceiling. Then rolled my eyes over to the window. The sensation of fear that ran through my body was like a sudden flow of freezing water over my skin. I felt my breath catch in my throat, my body stiffen. At the window was a face. A steel gray face with taut skin, empty eye sockets, twisted mouth. Lindsay touched my arm, which made me cry out and stare at her in horror.
"Good Lord," she said. "You all right?"
I sprang over to the window, hands pressed against the glass, eyes scanning the street outside, but it was empty. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath was quick. Behind me, Peter and Lindsay exchanged glances. I shook my head. I'm sorry. It was nothing. I thought I saw what I had seen. Nothing. It was nothing. I looked over at them, offered a weak smile. It's been a long day. They nodded at that, looking sympathetic. As we left the room, I glanced at the rope that had bound the mummy that now lay useless on the table. I wondered who had removed it. Who had released him? I shuddered. Such crimes you cannot imagine.